الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد عن أبي جري جابر بن سليم رضي الله عنه قال قلت لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اعهد إلي قال لا تسبن أحد قال فما سببت بعده حرا ولا عبدا ولا بعيرا ولا شاة قال ولا تحرقن شيئا من المعروف وأن تكلم أخاك وأنت منبسط إليه وجهك إن ذلك من المعروف وارفع إزارك إلى نصف الساق فإن أبيت فإلى الكعبين وإياك وإسبال الإزار فإنها من المخيلة وإن الله لا يحب المخيلة وإن امرؤ شتمك وعيرك بما يعلم فيك فلا تعيره بما تعلم فيه فإنما وبال ذلك عليه أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام وهو بعض الحديث رواه Abu Dawood. In continuation of our Dars of Hadith from the book of Muntakhab Ahadith, this is in the chapter of Ikram al-Muslim, particularly warning against harming a Muslim. And this is Hadith number 285. We have already done a portion of this Hadith as far as the translation is concerned and some basic details. This Hadith is from Abu Dawood. Abu Juray Jabir ibn Sulaym radiyallahu anhu, he narrates that I asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Irhad ilayya, give me some advice." Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam told him, "La tasubbanna ahad." Don't abuse anyone, don't curse at anyone, don't abuse anyone. Qala, the Rawi Abu Juray Jabir ibn Sulaym radiyallahu anhu, he says that فَمَا سَبَبْتُ بَعْدَهُ حُرًّا وَلَا عَبْدًا وَلَا بَعِيرًا وَلَا شَاةً. He says, after this advice was given to me, I've never abused or cursed any free man or any slave or any camel or any goat. I've never cursed anyone after this. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم further advised him, وَلَا تَحْرِقَنَّ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ وأن تكلم أخاك وأنت منبسط إليه وجهك إن ذلك من المعروف. Don't ever look down or don't ever consider any good deed as something small. Don't look down on any good deed thinking that it is something very small. It's nothing. Because even smiling at your brother or talking to your brother while you're having a smile on your face and a good mood, even that is from a good deed, or that is considered al-ma'ruf, from the good deeds. وَارْفَعْ إِزَارَكَ إِلَى نِصْفِ السَّاقِ فَإِنْ أَبَيْتَ فَإِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. And keep your izar, your trousers, up to the half of your shin. And if not, then at least up to your ankles. وَإِيَّاكَ وَإِسْبَالِ الْإِزَارِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنَ الْمَخِيلَةِ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمَخِيلَةِ. And be very careful and avoid, or make sure that you avoid dragging your trousers below your ankles, because that is from pride. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not like those who have pride or who are arrogant, who have pride. وَإِنِ امْرُؤٌ شَتَمَكَ وَعَيَّرَكَ بِمَا يَعْلَمُ فِيكَ فَلَا تُعَيِّرْهُ بِمَا تَعْلَمُ فِيهِ فَإِنَّمَا وَبَالُ ذَلِكَ عَلَيْهِ. And if someone is abusing you or mocking you or making fun of you, slandering you with something they know about you, so don't slander them back or don't abuse them back with something you know about them. Don't disgrace them if they're disgracing you, because then the blame of what they're doing will be on them. That sin will remain on them. You don't have to partake in that sin. This hadith is in Abu Dawood. A few points about this hadith regarding the first point لا تسبن أحد. Very, very beautiful advice of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that لا تسبن أحد. Do not abuse anyone. Do not curse at anyone. Be very, very careful with abusing anyone. And we have gone over some of the ayat of the Quran and also even the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in regards to cursing anyone or making a mockery of someone, whether it is their deen, whether it is their parents, whatever it might be. Very, very stern warnings have been given to us in the ayat of the Quran and also in the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Remember, in this abusive language, whether it is cursing someone or making a mockery or slander of someone, or any other type of abuse, in the end, it will come back and it will harm us. Whether it is done in an emotional state out of anger or it is done for whatever other reason, we should be very, very careful with our tongues and we should be very, very careful with our actions. And we should also avoid any kind of gathering where there are people who have this abusive nature, whether there's their language, the way they speak is abusive, or their language that they use is derogatory language. You should be very, very careful about this. Amongst the qualities of the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which are mentioned in the ayat of the Quran, regarding the Ibadur Rahman, the special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, amongst the many beautiful qualities that is mentioned about them in Surah Al-Furqan, at the ending of Surah Al-Furqan, one of those qualities is also وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. Whenever they pass by any kind of laghu, they pass in a very honorable way. Laghu has a very broad meaning, but one of the major aspects about laghu is that type of entertainment or that type of dialogue or discussions or gatherings that don't have any kind of benefit. It's just useless waste of time. And often a time in those kind of gatherings, there are various actions that are done that can lead a person towards sin and the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to be very, very careful with wasting our time or getting involved in useless discourse or getting involved in useless gatherings. Because the qualities of the mu'mineen is that they refrain or they avoid any kind of laghu. In a few places in the Quran, this is made very, very clear. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. The successful are the believers. Amongst their qualities is that they are very, very devoted in their salah. They have great devotion, concentration in their salah. And also, whenever it comes to laghu, they turn away from laghu. And laghu is any kind of useless act that can really become a waste of time. Generally, in the company of those people who have foul language or useless debates, and they get involved in various kinds of useless and waste of time discourse. Anything that we do, we should check if what we're doing is beneficial or not. And we should also check how our emotions are in various times. Because anyone who involves in laghu at the end, they'll waste their life away. We have to be very, very careful about this. And when we say laghu, we talk about useless entertainment. Now we are allowed within, again, the beauty of our deen of Islam is that we are allowed to have some type of entertainment within limits. Everything within limits is allowed. So long as that entertainment does not involve any kind of haram, or does not involve in a person becoming heedless and missing their salah, or heedless in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or going astray. So long as it is within the rules of our deen, you're allowed to have some time of entertainment. But it should not become a habit. But when it speaks about laghu, that type of laghu that it has almost no benefit whatsoever, and it can actually lead a person astray. There are many, many things that, especially in the 21st century, that can become a deterrence in a person's life. And oftentimes many of the youth and the young adults, they get involved in many of these things, and sometimes it develops into an addiction. To some degree, within limits, it is allowed. But when it becomes an addiction, and along with that addiction, destroys a person's life, a person loses sense of their responsibilities, and that can almost become haram. And in some cases, it becomes haram. Some of the video games, and again, we're talking about the 21st century, the year 2021. The past few years, you've seen the young adults, those that are late teens, early 20s, sometimes they get involved with certain video games, and it develops into an addiction for hours on end, or sometimes all night, and they'll be spending and wasting their time. And many of them, not all of the video games, but majority of the video games are laghu, are useless, they have no benefit. There are some that there have been some benefits written about them, and again, the harm outweighs, in some cases, the harm outweighs the benefit. So we have to be very, very careful what we get ourselves involved in. And again, it's not just the youth. Sometimes, unfortunately, even the adults get involved in some of these, and they develop an addiction. Within limits, what is halal, those within the limits of the deen that is allowed to play. Within limits, and a person is under control, that is allowed. But once he gets out of control, where a person even loses sense of their responsibilities, it can become very, very detrimental to one's future. And the reason I mention this is because one of the things that is attached with lahu is emotions. Often at time, those that have these addictions, when you try and break them off of that addiction, you try and make them understand that you're wasting your time, you're wasting your life, then many become impulsive, and their emotions get out of control. They become very emotional in that state. And sometimes they can even rebel against those that are trying to give them good advice. So we should be very, very careful in allowing ourselves to go down that path of laghu. There are also many different types of functions, many different types of groups, many different types of gatherings that can lead us astray and can get us far away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in many of those kind of gatherings, sometimes there is certain types of jokes or certain types of language, certain things discussed that are not appropriate for a believer. So we should also be careful partaking in that type of laghu, that type of vain and useless discourse and waste of time. So part of abuse, part of the abusive language is also staying away from those kind of gatherings and staying away from those kind of environments, that type of laghu that can put us in a very, very dangerous and strange position. We should be very, very careful with our time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran regarding the Ibadur Rahman, the special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. Whenever they pass by laghu, they pass in a very honorable way. They don't allow themselves to get disgraced or fall into disgrace. So we should be very, very careful with this. So the advice here is that do not curse or do not abuse anyone. And it does happen in some of these gatherings where a particular individual is picked out, singled out, they're mocked at, they're made fun of, they're abused, they're made a mockery of. We should never partake in these we should avoid in partaking in these kind of things. The next advice, وَلَا تَحْقِرَنَّ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَن تُكَلِّمَ أَخَاكَ وَأَنْتَ مُنْبَسِطٌ إِلَيْهِ وَجْهُكَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ. This is also a very unique advice, very, very deep advice. وَلَا تَحْقِرَنَّ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ. Don't ever consider any act of righteousness or any kind of good, any action, any act of kindness. Don't ever look down on it. Don't ever consider it insignificant. لَا تَحْقِرَنَّ. Don't consider it valueless. Don't consider it insignificant. We don't understand the value of righteous a'mal. And many a times what we think in this world is that there may be some amal that for us may seem insignificant. But with that amal, with that action, there is things that we don't see. There are many, many other factors attached to those amal that we don't see. And many a times if we're not careful, because we don't understand the many factors attached to those a'mal, if we look down on it or we make fun of it in any way, considering it insignificant, we can cause ourselves harm. One of the qualities of the munafiqeen, of the hypocrites, that is clearly mentioned in the ayat of the Quran, that believers and Muslims should refrain from and should stay away from those qualities. One of those qualities is also mocking and making fun of the a'mal of righteous people. Sometimes looking down on their efforts as if their efforts are insignificant or useless. And there are many, many examples in the ayat of the Quran and in the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and in the lives of Sahaba radiyallahu anhum that we can see, where the munafiqeen or the hypocrites would look down on their actions and even try and make a mockery of them. And in some of those cases, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He came to the defense of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum for their actions. Though on the surface, those a'mal seemed very small and may have seemed as if they were almost insignificant a'mal and actions. But what was attached with those actions, the sincerity and the efforts, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He accepts. In Surah Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in particular ayat tells us that there was actually an incident that took place in the Ghazwa Tabuk. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, before any expedition or any war, he would tell the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum to come and gather to give sadaqah and to give charity and make preparations for the expedition or the war. And one of those expeditions, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he made the announcement for charity and sadaqah. And the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, they started bringing whatever they could bring. Some brought all their wealth, some brought half their wealth, some brought whatever they could bring to make preparations for the journey expedition to Tabuk. And if there was any need or there was a war, then it was time to get ready. When the wealth was brought, everything was put together, a small heap of wealth that was gathered, that was going to be used and sold, and with that, weapons were to be bought and other materials, the horses and the camels. And when the charity was going on, there was one Sahabi in the morning after Fajr Salah, he brought 3 dates. And with those 3 dates, he put it in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the Sahabi, he walked away. There was a few munafiqeen, there were some hypocrites that were sitting there, and they saw the 3 dates. And in mockery, they looked at one another and they started giggling and laughing, and they said, look, we're going to win a war with 3 dates. And they were laughing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed the ayat, the verses. In Surah At-Tawbah, وَالَّذِينَ يَلْمِزُونَ الْمُطَّوِّعِينَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ إِلَّا جُهْدَهُمْ فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُمْ سَخِرَ اللَّهُ مِنْهُمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَلِيمٌ استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة فلن يغفر الله لهم. Very, very stern warning and very, very harsh words are used in these ayat against those munafiqeen, against those hypocrites. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in those ayat, Surah At-Tawbah, وَالَّذِينَ يَلْمِزُونَ الْمُطَّوِّعِينَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ, regarding the munafiqeen or the hypocrites, that they are trying to make fun of, or they're picking on the believers, those weak believers that are bringing charity. وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ إِلَّا جُهْدَهُمْ, these Sahaba, these sincere Sahaba and companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, these sincere Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they could find nothing but their efforts. فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُمْ, now these munafiqeen, these hypocrites are making fun of them. فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُمْ, they're making fun of those Sahaba radiallahu anhum. سَخِرَ اللَّهُ مِنْهُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throws their mockery back at them. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, on these hypocrites there will be a very, very painful punishment. استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم. O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if you ask for the forgiveness of these hypocrites, أو لا تستغفر لهم, or you don't seek their forgiveness, you don't ask me to forgive them. Remember one thing, O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة فلن يغفر الله لهم. Even if you do istighfar on their behalf, even O Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive these hypocrites 70 مرة, 70 times, فلن يغفر الله لهم, even then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forgive them. He will not forgive those hypocrites. So we should be very, very careful. This is a very, very serious warning for us, that sometimes there may be an individual performing a righteous deed, and for whatever reason, in our own mind or in our own hearts, we may look down on that good deed. We should be very, very careful. We should not think in any way that this amal they're performing is worthless or it doesn't have any value. We should be very, very careful, because we don't understand the reality behind that amal. In essence, the story was that the Sahabi who brought these 3 dates, he saw that all of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that they were bringing whatever sadaqah they had, whatever charity they could bring. And the Sahabi, he had nothing, but in his heart, he had this desire to give charity also. So he went out in search of work to find some job or find some work. And he went to one date garden. And in that date garden, the garden of dates, it was owned by a Jewish person. So this Sahabi, this companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he went to this Jewish owner of the garden. He said, listen, if you give me permission, I will work for you all night, and I will take care of your dates if you pay me something. And this Jewish individual, he needed someone to look after his garden. Particular work was needed. He was in search of a worker. So he made a deal with the Sahabi radiallahu anhu that, listen, you work all night, I'll give you 3 dates. That is the effort of one night. This Sahabi, who had nothing and really nowhere else to go, he said, okay, no problem. I will work all night, and whatever you give me, you just give me. So this Sahabi started working all night. You know how difficult it is. Again, working in a garden, these are date garden. You have to go up the tree and you have to cut down the dates. You have to bring them down. A lot of effort is required, a lot of sweat. Even in daytime, it is difficult to do this kind of work. So the Sahabi was working, and at the end, he got a few dates, these small handful of dates, 3, 4, few dates. And he brought that to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he put it there. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the effort and sincerity of this Sahabi in the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ إِلَّا جُهْدَهُمْ. That the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they are such that they could not find anything except their struggles and their efforts. All this struggle, this hard work, sweat and blood and whatever he could do, he brought these few days, this is what he could earn. So this was the sincerity of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And when these verses were revealed, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he commanded the Sahaba who were in charge of the sadaqah and charity, he told them, take these handful of dates and put it on top of all of the charity, all the sadaqah. So that it is hopeful that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepting the sincerity of this sadaqah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept the sadaqah of all those that gave charity. And all the charity will be accepted and rewarded for the efforts and sincerity of this one, a handful of dates. And that is why it carried so much value. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is also telling us in this hadith, that never look down. Never ever look down on any kind of good deed. We don't know. We don't know what sincerity is attached to that good deed. Also, what we don't know is that perhaps by us looking down on that good deed or making fun of it or even laughing at it or in any way discouraging someone from doing that good deed, we don't know what kind of punishment we're incurring upon ourselves. So every single good deed, we should give it its due importance, that this amal, if there's someone doing a good deed that we are not doing, we should check ourselves that what is wrong with me, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given me the tawfiq or ability to perform that good deed. We should check within ourselves. We should never think that some individual is doing a good deed and why are they doing this and what is the reasoning behind this. No, we should be very, very careful in what we think or what we feel regarding righteous deeds, regarding al-ma'ruf. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding and give all of us the tawfiq to practice His deen. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ.